Hi, I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny, and welcome to this edition of Chandler Inside and Out. Our guest today, for the second time in 2 years, we had you out here about a year ago, is Dr. Lee McPheters from Arizona State University. And I'm going to read all your accomplishments so I don't miss anything, and also your correct title. You are the director of the JPMorgan Chase Economic Outlook Center at Arizona State University and a research professor of economics, which we're going to talk about economics. You've been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, The Economist, Business Week, the New York Times, Newsweek, and you've appeared nationally on Good Morning America and CNN News, just to name a few, mainly being an expert and commenting on the economies of the Western states. So anyway, like I said earlier, you were here about a year ago, so we're going to catch up on the national economy, the state economy, a little bit about Chandler economy, and maybe a little bit about the global economy over the next half hour. But maybe before we start in with the questions on the economy, a little bit about your background, where you came from, how you ended up at ASU, and some of that.
Well, I've been at ASU since the mid-'70s. And really was driven by the motivation to get back to the West. My wife is a native of California. I'm a native of Washington State. And, back in the decade of the 70s and 80s, there was a tremendous amount of growth in the U.S. economy, particularly after we got past the recession of 1982, and Arizona was just a great place to be at that time. Mm-hmm. You know, we were leading the nation in practically every indicator, and in addition to that, that was a period when we had great football rankings as well at ASU.
And they're back with the football rankings
they're
there. Back. As we're taping, which is before the first game of the year. Some are predicting they might be in the Final Four. That's pretty optimistic, but that's a pretty noble goal. So, yeah, they're back to what we used to see in the 70s with the Cush regime. So.
I will say anything can happen. So
it's true.
No predictions on football from me.
So last year when you were here, we talked a lot of things, but maybe let's put in context where we are today, at least in terms of the local and state economies, with where we were a year ago. So September 2014 and comparing it where we are today in September 2015.
Well, one of the services that we offer in the Economic Outlook Center, of course, is economic forecasting. And we work with forecasters across the state and across the West. And I think most of them would probably agree that forecasters recognize that some portion of what they are saying is probably going to turn out to be inaccurate. Here's the problem. You don't know what is going to be accurate and what is going to be inaccurate. This time last year, even though we were almost, 3/4 of the way through the year, mm-hmm. there was a lot of optimism about the Arizona economy. When the final numbers were in for 2014, job growth was slower than the year before. Single-family activity was slower than the year before. Population growth did not really measure up to the expectations that we had for that year, building on 2013. And the only good news really was that there was a tremendous surge in multifamily building. So if that was your field and you were looking for, an apartment or whatnot, you had lots of choices. Mm-hmm. But all in all, while 2014 was a pretty good year, it was not as good as we expected and was not as good as the year before.
It was very lukewarm, 2014.
Absolutely. I think that's a good characterization. Was the economy hot? No. Was it cold? No. But it was sort of a lukewarm performance compared to where everyone thought we were going.
So maybe we can talk about some trends that we're seeing, but also you were recently quoted in the Arizona Republic on some positive trends with job growth in July of 2015. So where we're at today with that quote you had, where are we with job growth?
Well, we do have hard evidence on job growth. One of the indicators that most economists really track is the number of jobs in each month compared to the month before, compared to the same month a year ago. Those numbers are timely. They're revised every year, but the revisions, by and large, are not, so huge that they really affect, the quality of what you're seeing. And what we have for year to date has Arizona on track to add about 65,000 jobs. Now, to have some context, what did we do last year? Under 50,000. So 65,000 jobs is, solid job growth. I think that it's probably going to be the best year of the recovery yet. And so I think that we have the evidence in hand that 2015 is going to be a pretty good year.
So that's a good trend. Is that private and government payrolls, or is there a delineation there?
Government continues to be somewhat slow growth in Arizona. If you just look at private sector job growth, the latest numbers we have available, Arizona ranks 7th in the country in the rate of adding new private sector jobs. So that gets Arizona back to the kind of rankings that we saw in previous expansions, when typically you expect Arizona is going to be one of the top 10 job growth states. In terms of private job growth, we're there. When you add in your public sector, we slipped down to about 12th. We're still, still a top 15 job growth state, but I would say that compared to where we were a year ago, much better economy, and particularly in terms of job creation, I think we're about where most analysts expect Arizona ought to be right now.
So that 65,000 figure for job growth in 2015, again, a little bit of a forecast there because we got a couple months left. Is that strictly private, or is that both?
That would be the total, and government's not adding much to that.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
So we're feeling good about that, and that's good. The last time we talked, some of the key areas we were seeing job growth was healthcare, finance, and insurance. Is that still, or are we seeing any changes to that?
No, those trends are quite strong in Arizona. We're a top 10 job growth state right now in healthcare, in finance and insurance, in this very broad category called business services, which includes, a whole range of support services for business. But those are all signs of a developing economy. Those, for the most part, your healthcare, your finance jobs, those are quite good jobs, certainly at the upper end of healthcare. And those are jobs that we need in addition, to serve a growing economy. So that part of the Arizona economy, those three sectors are doing quite well.
And healthcare would include, I would think, like we just had a recent announcement in Chandler that CVS was adding a couple hundred jobs, maybe 600 if memory serves me right. And that dealt with prescriptions and calling in and providing services over the phone, and I assume that would be included.
That would be mixed. There's a scientific element, the labs and that sort of thing, and to the extent that CVS was actually involved with clinics and the on-site clinics. The other side of it would be retail,
right?
But certainly, when you have growth in just the core healthcare industries, hospitals, doctors' offices, care facilities, and this sort of thing, naturally your pharmacies and supporting pharmaceutical distributors and so on, they're going to grow as well.
Has a cascading effect on all those support
definitely.
companies. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. And then obviously with the insurance, you only have to drive by Tempe Town Lake and see those massive buildings that I believe State Farm is going to be occupying.
That's a big part of it. But, in regional economics, one of the things that analysts look for is what is called a cluster. And what that means is that as certain types of industries come into an area, that brings more workers with those certain skills. Maybe even the local educational institutions start tilting towards that kind of training. And the cluster then attracts more of those similar types of firms and workers, and so trying to establish, for example, in Arizona, a cluster of biotech, and that's developing. But we're also seeing, I think, in insurance and in finance and financial support and the data centers and things that go along with that, we're seeing those clusters develop as well.
Great. Yeah, it's exciting. We've seen some good successes
Right.
in all those areas in Chandler.
Right.
One thing we talked about last year, and it still is, I think, very relevant and pertinent, is population growth. I think last year, as we talked, I'm not sure if this is where we ended up, but we were talking about a 1.4% population growth for the year 2014. So maybe, is that kind of where we ended up? And then where are we at today? Because that's kind of been an element missing from the equation.
Yeah, the numbers are in the range of 1.5%. And again, to give some context to that, when the economy is really strong in Arizona, we would expect to grow 2.5%, maybe even 3%, the national rate of population growth. And that includes immigration, people coming in from outside the nation. That includes new births and, births minus deaths and so forth. That number is under 1%. So the nation as a whole grows, maybe 0.8%, something in that range. Arizona typically will grow twice as fast as the nation. So that's where we get that 1.5%. But when times are really good in Arizona, we'll grow 3 times as fast as the nation. And we're not seeing that. We haven't seen 2% population growth in ever since the recession ended. Yeah.
In the historic thing, I think we had a slide and it may have shown, or it may be getting ready to be shown, but where historically we would have about average about 3.2%.
Yeah.
Even though this year we're maybe at 1.5, we're still 6 in the nation in population growth, but it's not according to the standards what we were accustomed to, which is interesting. So the nation, that goes to your point that the nation is not really growing.
Well, looking at economic numbers, you always need that context. Okay, so population growth is 1.5%. Then to make a judgment, to make it, to be analytic about it, you say, okay, is that good, not so good? Well, compared to what? Compared to everywhere else, that puts Arizona among the top 10 states for population growth. So compared to everywhere else, we're doing well. Compared to our own history, we had a period, a 2-decade period from the 80s through into the early 2000s period where we grew on average over 3%, some years over 4%, and we just haven't seen that in years and years. But, I think that we're still capable of that. We're still capable of 100,000 new jobs a year. I think we're capable of 3% job growth, or 3% population growth to go with that strong job growth. But, we just haven't seen it yet because everything seems to be kind of geared down to sort of a half-speed type of economy.
It's very incremental, it seems like.
Right. But this year, looking better than last year.
We'll continue with the questioning in the program. In just a minute, I'm going to reintroduce the show.
Okay.
I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny in studio with Dr. Lee McPheters from ASU. He's an economist. You're watching Chandler Inside and Out, and hope you're enjoying the show. So back to population, Dr. McPheters. We always hear about the California exodus, a lot of people leaving California. I assume just because of the nature of our geography, we're getting our share of those folks. I also hear, though, Texas is getting a lot of those folks. Any thoughts on Californians and them moving into our state and other states?
Yeah, traditionally, Arizona population growth has been driven by relocation from California to Arizona, and then the whole Midwest region, Minnesota all the way down into Ohio, Illinois, that area there. And people leaving the Midwest are looking for a better quality of life, just in terms of climate and job opportunities and so forth. The driver from California, of course, very often is costs for a business. Costs are more reasonable in Arizona. Housing is more reasonable. And what we see year after year is that domestic population leaves California, But California is a state that has a growing population because you have an international flow, being on the coast. They have an international influx every year. And so California's population continues to grow, but they also continue to feed the western states, and especially the neighboring states, Oregon, Nevada, and California. Now, Texas, the attraction, of course, up until very recently has been job opportunities, because as the energy industry has really been quite active here in the last few years, Texas has logged a tremendous amount of job growth. That is now slowing down, and they're right now at least out of the top 10 job growth states. And I think that one of the issues about, why isn't Arizona population growth 2%, 3%, is because people do have other opportunities, other options, and I think Texas has been a real strong competitor.
They have been
for Arizona over the past few years.
They have been, and
Yeah.
I think we're going to finally start catching up with them for a number of factors. But they have been a major competitor on some of the
Sure.
economic
On
opportunities.
on
we
projects
pursued.
and so forth. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
they've been aggressive. So last year we talked about and I know you touched on it just a little bit earlier in the show, but the housing market, both single family, which didn't grow as much as it had the previous year, but then I guess the shining star, if you want to say, was the multifamily last year. I would assume that multifamily, based on what's happening in Chandler, has evened out or slowed down quite a bit in 2015.
Right.
And then where would we be on that? And also with the housing starts projected for 2015.
Yeah, 2014 was really a year for single-family housing growth. By our numbers, just about 50% increase over the previous year, while single-family permits were down about 10%.
So
Actually,
multifamily had a 50% increase.
yeah, multifamily. And the driver of that, many people believe, is the younger element of the population. They're not ready to buy a house yet, the so-called millennials, but they still need a place to live. As you know, I guess the image is they're moving out of their parents' basement and so forth. And of course, even though population growth isn't completely robust, it's still quite strong in Arizona. Newcomers need a place to live, and that was serving a growing market. What we are seeing now so far, and again, we have about half the year's data in hand, we expect to see that in Chandler, for example, single-family permits are going to be up 25%, and statewide maybe close to that. Phoenix metro area as a whole, I think, will be close to 25%. So it's going to be a good year for single-family housing compared to where we were a year ago. Certainly not back to the numbers that we've seen, in the really strong years, but going the right direction. The trend is up, and every reason to believe that that's going to continue.
Yeah, and I think with the young families starting out, maybe the wage growth or the amount of the wages didn't allow maybe the purchase of a house, so they've got to get established, and thus, yeah, we saw such a tremendous influx of apartments. It was actually mind-boggling.
This is you're describing one element of the economy, because the job growth is still not particularly strong, because population growth is still not particularly strong. Wage growth has been positive, but it has not been sizzling by any standard. So maybe 2.5% overall wage growth. And of course, you've got inflation in play. So real incomes not really rising that much. So we're waiting for, this is perhaps on the horizon. As the economy continues to improve, we would expect to see upward pressure on wages, resulting increases in income. Home prices, as they go up, that raises, the value, sort of the net worth of individual families, and that drives consumer spending. So all of these things are moving in the right direction. They're just moving right now at a rather slow pace of, but they're going in the right direction.
And that's what we like. We like to go in the right direction, but it's a lot slower than we've been accustomed to coming out of prior recessions or slowdown. So in Chandler, and we've talked on industry growth, health care, insurance, some of those, but like in Chandler specifically, and the state too, if you want to address it, maybe unemployment rates versus employment rates, and maybe some spots that might be different in Chandler than, say, trends for the rest of the state or valley.
Well, unemployment presents a lot of complexities for economists. It apparently presents fewer complexities for people that write headlines. That the headline unemployment rate might be, unemployment drops from 5.5% to 5.4%. But there's a lot going on behind that. To the extent that we have some part of the population that for whatever reason is simply dropping out, they're not looking for work, the labor force participation rate, which measures the number of people working versus the general population, that number has actually been trending down in past years. And as people sort of either give up looking for work or just voluntarily say, I'm going to do something else, that brings the unemployment rate down as well. So what you've got to look at really is whether the labor force is growing. And according to the recent numbers we have, the labor force is growing. So people are coming looking for work. And when you have an unemployment rate falling and more people coming into the labor market, labor force going up, that shows that you've got strength in the economy.
Yes.
So that's what we're seeing now.
Right.
That's what we're seeing now. So unemployment rates, I think, are probably on their way to 5%. In some parts of the economy, either demographically or in certain industries, rates are much lower. I mean, we know for a fact that people with a college education have a lower unemployment rate. People that have, let's say, less than a high school degree have a much higher unemployment rate. So it depends on, young people have a higher unemployment rate. So it depends on where you're looking, what industries you're looking at. And I would expect that Chandler, for example, although we don't have official unemployment numbers, I would expect that the Chandler unemployment rate is probably at 5% or lower right now.
And at the height of the recession, what were some of these unemployment rates? Did it get to 9%? Or?
Oh, well, yeah, statewide, I think we were, kissing 10%. Yeah. But in the construction industry, it was in the higher double digits, over 10%. Yet you go, we were talking about healthcare, you look at your medical doctors, their unemployment rate was under 2%. Hospitals in general, hospital workers in general had an unemployment rate under 4%, even in the depths of the recession. So you have these variations. And, the message is that, you really should get a degree, get a skill, get into a profession that, is going to have continuing growth and demand, and ideally something that can't be sent off to China,
Right.
Your job exported.
That's good advice for people that are either re-educating themselves or just starting to educate on fields, whether it be the insurance or the healthcare, the engineering, because we have tremendous demand for engineers because of all of our high-tech businesses.
Right.
So all of the indications, as we've talked today, we're recovering. It's a slow recovery. And I think last year when we met, we said we're probably 2 to 3 years from a full economic recovery. Today, what would you say? Again, we're moving in the right direction, which we all think that we're blessed with that. But where do you think we are in terms of getting to a full recovery, if we could ever get to a full recovery?
Yeah. Well, of course, different industries are going to look at this differently. We have already recovered all the lost jobs in finance, for example. The construction industry would look at this completely differently. They would say that we lost over 100,000 jobs and we've made very little progress towards getting those jobs back. I think that perhaps a rule of thumb here is to look at just the overall economy, the jobs that were lost, where are we towards getting those jobs recovered, not breaking it out by construction or healthcare or whatnot. And for Arizona, we've recovered about 79% as of today.
Overall.
Of the lost jobs. In the Metro Phoenix area, about 89% of those jobs have been recovered. Other parts of the state not doing so well. Tucson, about 32% of the lost jobs have been
That figure
recovered.
is fairly astounding to me.
Simply slow growth, slow population growth. Typically we look to Tucson, strong high-tech manufacturing, particularly hard hit by the cutback on defense spending.
Okay.
That was an effect there, I think. But where are we in terms of
Sequestration.
Yes. Where are we in terms of the jobs lost? We still need to get back about 67,000 jobs, and then we'll have, as a state, we'll have recovered all the lost jobs. So if our projection for 65,000 jobs in 2015 is actually accurate, more or less, then this will be the year that we recover all the lost jobs.
So that's the 79%, or it equates to 65,000.
Yeah.
So we could be back to we were.
We could, be back to where we were. Now there's other states that have recovered those lost jobs and are moving forward.
Yeah.
And Arizona's been a bit slower, which is not typical for Arizona in a recovery.
What I term you as still optimistic.
Very much so for the long term. Yeah.
Good. That's good to hear. We only had about 2 minutes left, I think. Just real quickly, the recent volatility in the stock market. Any thoughts in 30 seconds on that?
Economists separate out the stock market from the real economy. And this volatility does affect, of course, people's portfolios, their 401ks, their optimism about the future and so forth. But in terms of actual jobs, actual output, the Chinese economy is really not a major part of the nation's, export package. It's certainly important, but I think that a slowing China is going to have more effect on the financial markets than it has on the jobs of most of your viewers that are watching here.
Okay, good feedback. As always, I find it fascinating to talk to you, and this half hour goes pretty quickly. Any last thought before we call it a day?
I think the main takeaway is that 2015 is going to be the best year yet for the Arizona economy. And, there are risks. The national economy could slow down. The global economy could really crater. We don't expect that, but, we're not seeing a lot of strong growth globally. But a good year for Arizona.
And 2016 will be a presidential election, and that'll probably play into some of the economy.
Anything can happen. It's the same as the football forecast.
All right, well, we'll get you back again at least a year from now, and if it gets kind of interesting or other type of developments, maybe even sooner, but always appreciate having you in studio.
Okay, good to be with you.
I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny. You've been watching Chandler Inside and Out. Hope you enjoyed the program today. I certainly did. Until we see you again, take care and be safe. Thank you. This is really interesting stuff.